1961, the world is still reeling from the Nuremberg trials. Millions of ordinary people had participated in the Holocaust, not just soldiers, not just fanatics, teachers, fathers, neighbors. And the question haunting every psychologist, every philosopher, every court in the world was, how? How do you get normal people to do monstrous things? A psychologist named Stanley Milgram thought he had a way to find out. He placed an ad in the paper, paid people $4.50, about $45 today, to take part in what he called a study on memory and learning. Participants arrived at a Yale laboratory. They were greeted by a man in a gray lab coat. They were told, "Today, you are the teacher." In the next room sat another person, the learner, strapped into a chair, electrodes on their wrists. The teacher's job, read word pairs, test the learner's memory. And if they got an answer wrong, press a button, deliver a shock. Starting at 15 volts, labeled slight shock, going all the way up to 450 volts, labeled at the very end with just XXX. Here's what participants didn't know. The learner, an actor. The shocks, not real. The machine, completely fake. But the screams, pre-recorded, carefully scripted, were designed to sound absolutely real. At 75 volts, a grunt of pain. At 150 volts, get me out of here. I refuse to continue. At 300 volts, pounding on the wall. At 315 volts, silence. And that silence was somehow worse. When participants hesitated, when they stood up, when they said, "I don't want to keep doing this," the experimenter had exactly 4 responses. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. No threats, no weapons, no punishment, just a calm man in a lab coat. 65% of people kept going, all the way to 450 volts, not monsters. Not people who wanted to hurt anyone, regular people sweating, shaking, begging to stop, pressing the button anyway. But Milgram didn't stop there. He ran over 20 variations. And what he found tells us exactly what was pulling the strings. Move the learner into the same room as the teacher, close enough to see their face. Compliance dropped to 40%. Make the teacher physically hold the learner's hand onto the shock plate, drop to 30%. Remove the authority figure from the room, instructions over the phone only, drop to 20%. And several participants lied, claiming to deliver shocks they didn't. But here's the one that stops me every time. Put 2 actors in the room who openly refuse to continue and seat the real participant alongside them, 10%. The presence of just one other person willing to say no was enough to give people permission to stop. Think about what that means. Now we need to talk about what Milgram did to the people in that room, because the learners were fine, actors, remember. But the teachers, many had full breakdowns during the study, trembling, nervous laughter, not because anything was funny, but because that's what terror sometimes looks like. One man had a seizure. They were deceived profoundly, and then left to believe, at least for a moment, that they had willingly electrocuted a stranger. The American Psychological Association investigated Milgram, temporarily suspended his membership. His experiment ignited a firestorm that ultimately gave us the ethical rules governing psychology today. Informed consent, the right to withdraw, institutional review boards. Critics went further. Psychologist Diana Baumrind called it outright cruel. She argued that Yale's own prestige was a variable Milgram never controlled for, that participants may have trusted the institution, not just the man in the coat. And there's a deeper question. Were they truly convinced? Some participants later said they suspected it was a test of them, not the learner. A 2009 partial replication by Jerry Berger, stopping at 150 volts, still found similar compliance rates, but we can't fully know what happens beyond that line anymore. So what do we actually know? Here's the thing nobody likes to say out loud. Milgram didn't discover that humans are secretly evil. He discovered something much stranger, and in many ways, much scarier. Evil doesn't require evil people. It requires a system. Hannah Arendt, watching the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in 1961, the exact same year Milgram ran his experiment, coined a phrase that still haunts political philosophy: the banality of evil. Eichmann wasn't a monster. He was a bureaucrat. He followed a chain of command. He trusted the process. He didn't think of himself as doing anything wrong. He was just doing his job. And Milgram's teachers, they weren't doing anything wrong either. They were participating in science, following the instructions of an expert,